Hello children, this video is the second part of the story The Chinese Statue by Jeffrey Archer. Let us continue from where we had left. We have to begin from page 64. Sir Alexander smiled his thanks and thought carefully about the Mandarin's words. Once back in his official residence, he went immediately to the embassy's extensive library to see if he could discover a realistic value for the little masterpiece. After much diligent research, much diligent means thorough, he came across a drawing of a Ming statue that was almost an exact copy of the one now in his possession, and with the help of the Mandarin, he was able to assess its true worth. A figure that came to almost 3 years' emolument for a servant of the crown. Emolument means money paid to somebody for work he has done. The minister discussed the problem with Lady Heathcote, and she left her husband in no doubt as to the course of action he must take. The following week, the minister dispatched a letter by private messenger to his bankers, Coutts & Co. in the Strand, London, requesting that they send a large part of his savings to reach him in Peking as quickly as possible. When the funds arrived, 9 weeks later, the minister again approached the Mandarin, who listened to the questions and gave him the details he had asked for 7 days later. The Mandarin had discovered that the little craftsman Yung Li came from the old and trusted family of Yung Shaw, who had some 500 years been craftsmen. So Yung Li's ancestors have also been craftsmen like him. Sir Alexander also learned that many of Yung Li's ancestors had examples of their work in the palaces of the Manchu princes. Yung Li himself was growing old and wished to retire to the hills above the village where his ancestors had always died. His son was ready to take over the workshop from him and continue the family tradition. The minister thanked the Mandarin for his diligence. Diligence means careful and thorough work. Mandarin for his diligence and had only one more request of him. The Mandarin listened sympathetically to the ambassador from England and returned to the palace to seek advice. A few days later, the Empress granted Sir Alexander's request. Almost a year to the day, the minister, accompanied by the Mandarin, set out again from Peking for the village of Halichua. When Sir Alexander arrived, he immediately dismounted from his horse and entered the workshop that he remembered so well. The old man was seated at his bench, his flat hat slightly askew means crooked, a piece of uncarved ivory held lovingly between his fingers. He looked up from his work and shuffled towards the minister, not recognizing his guest immediately until he could almost touch the foreign giant. Foreign giant here refers to Alexander Heathcote. Then he bowed low. The minister spoke through the Mandarin. "I have returned, sir, within the calendar year to repay my debt." "There was no need, Your Excellency. My family is honored that the little statue lives in a great embassy and may one day be admired by the people of your own land." The minister could think of no words to form an adequate reply and simply requested that the old man should accompany him on a short journey. So here we come to know that Sir Alexander Heathcote, within the calendar year, he was coming back to repay the debt to the craftsman for having gifted him the Chinese statue. So he asks the craftsman to accompany him on a journey. The craftsman agreed without Question. And the three men set out on donkeys towards the north. They travelled for 2 hours up a thin winding path into the hills behind the craftsman's workshop. And when they reached the village of Martin, they were met by another mandarin who bowed low to the minister and requested Sir Alexander and the craftsman to continue their journey with him on foot. So they got down from the donkeys and set forth on foot. They walked in silence to the far side of the village and only stopped when they had reached a hollow in the hill from which there was a magnificent view of the valley all the way down to Hali Chuang. In the hollow stood a newly completed small white house of the most perfect proportions. Two stone lion dogs, tongues hanging over their lips, guarded the front entrance. The little old craftsman, who had not spoken since he had left his workshop, remained mystified. Mystified means confused by the purpose of the journey. So he did not know why he had been brought by Sir Alexander Heathcote to this place, until the minister turned to him and offered a small inadequate gift and my feeble attempt to repay you in kind. So here we see that Sir Alexander Heathcote was repaying the craftsman for the gift of the Chinese statue by giving him a beautiful house. The craftsman fell to his knees and begged forgiveness of the mandarin, as he knew it was forbidden for an artisan to accept gifts from a foreigner. Artisan is a person who does skilled work. So the craftsman fell to his knees because he knew that he could not accept gifts from a foreigner. The mandarin raised the brighted blue figure from the ground, explaining to his countryman that the empress herself had sanctioned the minister's request. So here we come to know that Sir Alexander Heathcote had actually requested the empress as to whether he could gift Yung Li this beautiful house. A smile of joy came over the face of the craftsman, and he slowly walked up to the doorway of the beautiful little house, unable to resist running his hand over the carved lion dogs. The three travelers then spent over an hour admiring the little house before returning in silent mutual happiness back to the workshop in Hali Chuang. The two men thus parted, honor satisfied, and Sir Alexander rode to his embassy that night, content that his actions had met with the approval of the mandarin as well as Lady Heathcote. So all of them were happy at what Sir Alexander Heathcote had done. The minister completed his tour of duty in Peking, and the empress awarded him the Silver Star of China, and a grateful queen added the KCVO to his already long list of decorations. After a few weeks back at the Foreign Office clearing the China desk, Sir Alexander retired to his native Yorkshire, the old English county whose inhabitants still hope to be born and die in the same place, not unlike the Chinese. So what is county? County is a land that is ruled by a county or by a countess. Sir Alexander spent his final years in the home of his late father and his wife and the little Ming emperor. The statue occupied the center of the mantelpiece in the drawing room for all to see and admire. It was placed in such a place where anyone could spot the statue and admire it. Being an exact man, Sir Alexander wrote a long and detailed will in which he left precise instructions for the disposal of his estate, including what was to happen to the little statue after his death. He bequeathed the Emperor Kung to his first son, requesting that he do the same. in order that the statue might always pass to the first son or a daughter if the direct male line faltered. So he gifted the statue to his first son, requesting him to carry on the tradition in the family, that if there was no male child in the family, then it could pass on to the daughter. He also made a provision that the statue was never to be disposed of unless the family's honor was at stake. Yes. So if they had to save the honor of the family, then only they actually could do away with the statue. Means they could sell it. Sir Alexander Heathcote died at the stroke of midnight on his 70th year. That means he died when he was 70 years old. His first son, Major James Heathcote, was serving his queen in the Boer War at the time he came into possession of the Ming Emperor. The major was a fighting man commissioned with the Duke of Wellington's regiment, and although he had little interest in culture, even he could see the family heirloom was no ordinary treasure. So he loaned the statue to the regimental mess at Halifax in order that the emperor could be displayed in the dining room for his brother officers to appreciate. So the son of Sir Alexander Heathcote, who has been gifted this statue by his father, he realized the worth and importance of the statue. Since he was a major serving the queen, what he did was he displayed this statue in the dining room in the regimental mess at Halifax, so that rest of his friends also could admire and see his beautiful statue. When James Heathcote became colonel of the Dukes, the emperor stood proudly on the table alongside the trophies won at Waterloo and Sebastopol in the Crimea and Madrid. When James Heathcote got a promotion and he became a colonel, then the emperor was removed from the regimental mess at Halifax, and it stood proudly on the table where all the other trophies were won at Waterloo and Sebastopol in the Crimea and Madrid. And there the Ming statue remained until the colonel's retirement to his father's house in Yorkshire, when the emperor returned once again to the drawing room mantelpiece. The colonel was not a man to disobey his late father, even in death, and he left clear instructions that the heirloom must always be passed on to the firstborn of the Heathcotes unless the family honor was in jeopardy. Jeopardy means in a dangerous situation. Colonel James Heathcote, MC, did not die a soldier's death. He simply fell asleep one night by the fire, the Yorkshire post on his lap. Although he was a soldier throughout his life, he did not die on the battlefield. He died in his sleep. The colonel's firstborn, the Reverend Alexander Heathcote, was at the time presiding over a small flock in the parish of Mudge Haddam in Hertfordshire. So he was the son of Colonel James Heathcote. He was Reverend Alexander Heathcote, and he was in charge of a parish. After burying his father with military honors, he placed the little Ming emperor on the mantelpiece of the vicarage. Vicarage is what? Where the priest resides. Few members of the Mothers' Union appreciated the masterpiece, but one or two old ladies were heard to remark on its delicate carving. And it was not until the Reverend became the Right Reverend. The Right Reverend means the bishop. And the little statue found its way into the bishop's palace that the emperor attracted the admiration he deserved. Till Reverend Alexander Heathcote was just a parish priest, the few ladies from the Mothers' Union used to admire. Some of them were found to be remarking about its beautiful carvings, but it was later when Reverend Alexander Heathcote became the bishop. The statue got the admiration that it really deserved. Many of those who visited the palace and heard the story of how the bishop's grandfather had acquired the Ming statue were fascinated to learn of the disparity between the magnificent statue and its base. They also came to know of the story regarding the base which was added to this piece of art. It always made a good after dinner story. Means many families talked about it, especially after they had finished their dinner, as it was a good story to be told. God takes even his own ambassadors, but he did not do so before allowing Bishop Heathcote to complete a will, leaving the statue to his son with his grandfather's exact instructions carefully repeated. Before Bishop Heathcote died, he very diligently wrote out a will exactly how his grandfather, Sir Alexander Heathcote, had written out regarding this Chinese statue. The bishop's son, Captain James Heathcote, was a serving officer in his grandfather's regiment. So the Ming statue returned to the mess table in Halifax. Once more it went back. During the emperor's absence, the regimental trophies had been augmented by those struck for Pries and Marne and Verdun. The regiment was once again at war with Germany, and young Captain James Heathcote was killed on the beaches of Dunkirk and died intestate. Intestate means not having made a will before one dies. So he could not make a will and he died. Therefore, English law, the known wishes of his great-grandfather, and common sense prevailed, and the little emperor came into the possession of the captain's 2-year-old son. So since the family knew about Sir Alexander's will and his wishes, so it was naturally passed down to the captain's 2-year-old son. Alex Heathcote was, alas, not of the mettle of his doughty ancestors, and he grew up feeling no desire to serve anyone other than himself. Now we see here Alex Heathcote. He was a very selfish person and he did not have that same mettle. When Captain James had been so tragically killed, Alexander's mother lavished everything on the boy that her meager income would allow. Meager means small. When Alex's father, that is Captain James, when he dies very tragically, what happened was the mother, she showered all her love and concern on the little boy. Although she was not able to do so because she had very little amount of money with her. It didn't help, and it was not entirely young Alex's fault that he grew up to be, in the words of his grandmother, a selfish, spoiled little brat. So he turned out to be a very selfish individual. When Alex left school, only a short time before he would have been expelled. He was quite notorious as he was about to be expelled from his school. He found he could never hold down a job for more than a few weeks. It always seemed necessary for him to spend a little more than he and finally his mother could cope with. After because Heathcote was a spendthrift. Spendthrift means he was spending more than he had. The good lady, deciding she could take no more of this life, departed it to join all the other Heathcotes, not in Yorkshire, but in heaven. So eventually she died. In the swinging 60s, when casinos opened in Britain, young Alex was convinced that he had found the ideal way of earning a living without actually having to do any work. He developed a system for playing roulette, with which it was impossible to lose. Roulette is what? A gambling game. So he engaged himself in this particular gambling game in the casino. He did lose, so he refined the system and promptly lost more. He started gambling more and more, and he lost more and more money. He refined the system once again, which resulted in him having to borrow to cover his losses. Why not? If the worst came to the worst, he told himself, he could always dispose of the little Ming emperor. He was getting into a mess. He always thought that if he was really in need of money, he would definitely sell off the Ming emperor. The worst thing come to the worst, as each one of Alex's newly refined systems took him progressively into greater debt until the casinos began to press him for payment. When finally, one Monday morning, Alex received an unsolicited call from two gentlemen who seemed determined to collect some 8,000 pounds he owed their masters, and hinted at bodily harm if the matter was not dealt with within 14 days. So he was deep down in debt. One fine day, two gentlemen appeared at his doorstep, and they threatened him and told him that they would physically harm him if he did not return the money. Alex caved in, means he just broke down. After all, his great-great-grandfather's instructions had been exact. The Ming statue was to be sold if the family honor was ever at stake. Now, since the family honor was at stake, so he decided to sell the Ming statue. Alex took the little emperor off the mantelpiece in his Cadogan Gardens flat and stared down at its delicate handiwork, at least having the grace to feel a little sad at the loss of the family heirloom. So he had finally decided to sell it off, and then he took it off the mantelpiece for one last time. He looked at, feeling quite sorry. But he was helpless. He then drove to Bond Street and delivered the masterpiece to Sotheby's, giving instructions that the emperor should be put up for auction. That is how the emperor had come to be in that auction room. The head of the Oriental department, a pale, thin man, appeared at the front desk to discuss the masterpiece with Alex, looking not unlike the Ming statue he was holding so lovingly in his hands. It will take a few days to estimate. Estimate means to roughly calculate the true value of the piece, he purred. Means he has said that it would take at least a few days to judge the value of the piece. But I feel confident on a cursory glance that the statue is as fine an example of pen-Q as we have ever had under the hammer. That's no problem, replied Alex. So long as you can let me know what it's worth within 14 days. Oh, certainly, replied the expert. I feel sure I could give you a floor price by Friday. Couldn't be better, said Alex. During that week, he contacted all his creditors, and without exception, they were prepared to wait and learn the appraisal of the expert. So he tried to pacify all the people whom he owed money, and then they agreed to wait. Alex duly returned to Bond Street on the Friday with a large smile on his face, because he was very excited, as he knew that he would get a lot of money. He knew what his great-great-grandfather had paid for the piece and felt sure that the statue must be worth more than 10,000 pounds, a sum that would not only yield him enough to cover all his debts, but leave him a little over to try out his new refined system on the roulette table. So he was definite that the statue would get him at least 10,000 pounds, and also leave him with enough to try his lunch again at the roulette table. As he climbed the steps of Sotheby's, Alex silently thanked his great-great-grandfather, because he was thinking that now he was going to be freed from the chains of the debts that he was drowning in. He asked the girl on reception if he could speak to the head of the Oriental department. She picked up an internal phone, and the expert appeared a few moments later at the front desk with a somber look on his face. Somber means sad and serious. Alex's heart sank as he listened to his words. Immediately, as soon as Alex saw the expert's face, he saw that the expert did not have good news for him. A nice little piece, your emperor, but unfortunately a fake, probably about 250 years old, but only a copy of the original, I'm afraid. Copies were often made because... How much is it worth? Interrupted an anxious Alex. 700 pounds. 800 at the most. So Alex's heart felt sad at that moment when he is told that it was not an original piece of art. Enough to buy a gun and some bullets, thought Alex sardonically as he turned and started to walk away. Sardonically means mockingly. I wonder, sir, continued the expert. Yes, yes, sell the bloody thing, said Alex, without bothering to look back. He says, because now he knew that he won't be getting 10,000 pounds that he was looking for. And what do you want me to do with the base? The base, replied Alex, turning round to face the Orientalist. Yes, the base. It's quite magnificent. 15th century, undoubtedly a work of guineas. I can't imagine how. Guineas. Guinea is a gold coin which originally worth 20 shillings. Lot number 103 announced the auctioneer, what am I bid for this magnificent example of? The expert turned out to be right in his assessment. At the auction at Sotheby's that Thursday morning, I obtained the little emperor of 720 guineas, and the base that was acquired by an American gentleman of not unknown parentage for 22,000 guineas. So children, from this story we came to know that the Chinese statue, the Ming Emperor, which was the original piece, or which was expensive, or which could bring a fortune, it turned out that the base which the craftsman Yung Li had fixed very casually turned out to be more expensive and of greater value.